Excited to introduce our next National Security Fireside Chat. Not yet has the joke been made that we're missing a fire for the Fireside Chat, so just imagine that you are where our next speaker spent a lot of time in Albuquerque, New Mexico with a high of about 110 degrees today, and you can imagine that there's a fire here in the front that we're having the conversation around. So our next conversation will be with Colonel Eric Felt, who's the Director of Architecture and Integration in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space Acquisition and Integration at the Pentagon here in D.C., and longtime board member of the Future Space Leaders Foundation, Deborah Factor, who's head of Airbus U.S. Space Systems, Airbus U.S. Space Systems and Defense Incorporated. I'm going to do a quick bio on both of our next speakers because they're both such impressive backgrounds. I want you to have that as sort of a preface to the conversation we're going to have. So Colonel Felt, in his current role, leads a team of 25 military, civilian, and on-site contractors responsible for developing and integrating the Department of Defense, Department of the Air Force, and United States Space Force architectures in space. His organization focuses on optimizing the Space Force budget, over $15 billion, which is invested in a portfolio of resilient space capabilities, including communications, position navigation and timing, remote sensing, space access, mobility and logistics, as well as space control. Colonel Felt received his commission in 1991 from Duke University's Air Force ROTC program. He entered active duty in 1996 after completing a master's in science and a doctorate degree in electrical engineering. He's a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School and has served as a developmental engineer and program manager in lab, test, program office, and staff assignments. Prior to his current position, Colonel Felt was director down in Albuquerque of the Air Force Research Lab Space Vehicles Directorate. I have to say, particular appreciation for your visionary leadership in creating what is now the Oracle program as the team trusted to lead that effort at advanced space. Space situational awareness at the moon is obviously a very timely topic to have been working, I know, many years to get that going. So thank you, sir, for your work there. Deborah Factor, in her role, is responsible for leading Airbus U.S.'s space systems, which includes managing the national security space and space exploration line of business in the U.S. She's a member of the Airbus OneWeb Satellites board. Prior to joining the Airbus U.S. team, Deborah was vice president and general manager of strategic operations for Ball Aerospace, leading the company's Washington, D.C. operations, strategic development, and marketing and communications. Deborah is actively engaged as an advisor and mentor in the aerospace community, not just in Future Space Leaders Foundation, but as a fellow of the AIAA, the AAS, and the IAA, a little acronym soup there. I won't spell them all out for everybody. Deborah is also a proud alumna of the University of Michigan, where she received both her bachelor's and master's degree in aerospace engineering. So thank you both for being here, and I look forward to your chat. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe we don't have to sit so far apart.
No, how about
let's
right
do
here?
This. All right.
And if we need any heat from the fire, we'll just step outside for a few minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks, Brad and Future Space Leaders Foundation for hosting this yet again. As Brad mentioned, I've been involved with the board for many years and since the beginning. So super fun to see all of you here today and also share a chat with my longtime friend. I'm just gonna call you Eric.
You bet, you bet.
So, great to connect with you again. I think we first met, we were trying to figure it out like 15-ish or so years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Eric was in the Pentagon and a program element monitor for a program that was jointly developed by DARPA and the Air Force. I was the president of Air Launch. We were trying to develop a air launch rocket out of the back end of C-17. It was a little bit crazy times back then. So
it was super cool.
It was super cool. I've had a career journey since then, so have you, as we've learned. So why don't you first just tell me a little bit about your career journey since then? You can start there or start earlier, either one, some of the highlights of how you got where you are today.
Sure. Well, that was been most of the space portion of my career. The first 10 years of my career was doing airplane flight test stuff. Then I discovered space at the NRO, and it's been all space ever since then. And so that was kind of, first did NRO, DARPA, and then this Pentagon job. And then after that, was out to Kirtland in New Mexico to do some launch support stuff with portable antennas that we took around the world. And then school, NRO, back to Kirtland, and then I did a little bit of ICBM stuff in there, and then back to AFRL, and then back to here. So one thing I did learn, if you're ever assigned to the Pentagon, a good chance you're going to come back, because after you figure out how it all works and how to be effective within that organization, then you'll be very valuable later in your career when you can come back and lead the younger folks who are doing that. So that seems like a very common plan, and I guess that's where I am now.
Yeah.
I joined the Space Force 2 years ago. I was in the Air Force before that, but when I stood up the Space Force, honestly, I was about ready to, I was pretty much ready to retire after that AFRL job, but I was like, man, I can't miss the chance to be on the ground floor of the new service, and it was very exciting, and so really glad I did that. But that's happened 2 years ago, when that was the first opportunity when they stood up the Space Force.
So last night was an event that had an award to the Space Force, and General Raymond and General Thompson actually swore in 2 new recruits to the Space Force. I mean, I had tears in my eyes. We did the Pledge of Allegiance first, and to see people who are so excited about joining space. So we have a crowd here of space enthusiasts. So I'm curious, why did you end up deciding space was the thing for you after flight tests, pilot school, and doing airplane and ICBMs? So why space?
That would come down to my first assignment there at the NRO, and what I really liked about it was, at that time, was that it was a very a technical field where there were real technical challenges that needed to be solved and conquered, and technical skills were really valued and made a difference. And then in the end, the capability that we delivered was very important to our nation and our DoD. So we felt like we were having a big impact on being able to deter conflict and help our forces accomplish their mission. So I think, to me, it was the technical excitement and the challenges, but plus the feeling of making a difference. And of course, most of us, as we go through our career, those are the kind of things that we're looking for.
So now you're in the Space Force, and a lot of the philosophy behind it is making a difference for the warfighter. Our market is changing fast, threats are changing, there's a need to be more responsive, more agile, more resilient. So this brings back some echoes of back in our original program, and you were instrumental in an area called Operationally Responsive Space, which back then we had great dreams and visions. They weren't quite realized, and today we're trying to do it and actually implementing in many ways. So tell me about your perspective of what does Operationally Responsive Space mean today? What is the Space Force doing? How are you making a difference with this new role in architecture and integration?
Sure. So the idea behind Operationally Responsive Space was that space traditionally took a long time to do things. We built large satellites. It took a decade. Sometimes programs failed. It was a very slow and deliberate enterprise. And the idea behind Operationally Responsive Space was to be able to build at least small things quickly and then put them on orbit in response to urgent needs or things that were not expected. And by the way, that's still a good idea. At the time, it was in the OOs here. It was I would now say it was an idea that was before its time in a couple of ways. I mean, first of all, we had ways to launch stuff quickly from airborne rockets, ground-based rockets, or whatever. But what were we going to launch? The only thing we could launch were small satellites, and we didn't really have any small satellites as part of our architecture. And you're not going to launch something in a time of conflict that you haven't, trained with and used in peacetime. So we were left with that. There's few use cases for this because we didn't have small satellites in the architecture. Fast forward to now, we got all kinds of proliferated low Earth orbit constellations made up of small satellites. You can easily imagine needing to responsibly launch something to augment, to reconstitute, to respond to an unexpected action by one of our peer competitors. So the need to responsibly launch small satellites used to not go anywhere, and now because we have because of small satellite technology and the threat, it's a lot more needed today and possible today. The other thing that we're talking about now is not only tactically responsive or responsibly launching, we call it tactically responsive space now. It's been renamed. But instead of just tactically launching small satellites, I mean, we're interested in tactically launching big satellites too. And with Starship and Falcon 9s and things like that, in a production mode, it enables that kind of thinking as well, which is pretty neat too. So in those two things have changed a lot since we were first proving out that technology 15 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. And personally, I've switched from the launch to the satellite side in my career. And one of the things we're doing at Airbus US, building satellites now for Northrop Grumman, for Space Development Agency, for OneWeb. It's been super fun to see what you can do with a production line that we didn't used to have. So the vision to become the reality. And I always observe, and I'd like your thoughts on the next step. So launch is a component, satellites are a component, then you need responsive payloads, you need responsive ground and data, and ultimately get to the warfighter. So what's the change today to actually get the results of what we deliver into space into the hands of the warfighters who need it, or the decision makers to do something, make an action, take an action? How is that circle going, and why will it work today?
I think we have a lot more tools in the toolbox today to make that work. And a couple of ways that in the Space Acquisition Office in the Pentagon that my boss is trying to get after that is by really emphasizing speed in acquisitions. Acquisition does not need to be a super slow, cumbersome process. When we need to go fast, we have the tools to go fast. Congress has given us those, and we can use those. And he has really emphasized that because that helps us get after every part of that chain if you can do it quickly. Now, not everything needs to be done quickly, but when some things do. So that's the speed part of it. And then the focus on deterring China and the resilience of our space architectures. Every decision in the Pentagon is about space is made on resilience and then how quickly we can get there. First of all, how do we get to resilience? And then secondly, how fast can we get there? And that lots of money has moved as a result of those decisions, and that's a really good thing. I have not seen so much focus in our space enterprise in my whole career. Yeah. So I think that focus and that unity of effort behind what we're trying to do but with resilience is very helpful as well to working on that. And then the last thing I would offer is that DevSecOps for software is a great way to spiral out new capabilities in a rapid way, and rather than a big waterfall acquisition like we used to do. And with today's space technology, that isn't just for software. I mean, we can do that for hardware, for launch, every part of that life cycle that you described. We can apply that kind of iterative spiral model, and that's been very effective. Like the Space Development Agency is kind of our poster child for how to do that in space, but it helps us be a lot more effective at our mission of deterring China and putting resilient capabilities up there. So those are some of the ways that we're trying to get after every piece of that. But you're right, all that has to come together in order to deliver our mission.
So let me ask a question of what does resilience mean to you? So it's a word that is used a lot. You might read about it in the press. I'm going to ask our audience, how many of you have heard about resilient space? Okay, a few hands. So I think worth explaining what actually does that mean? What's the context?
Yeah, so to the DoD, resilient space means that our space capabilities, that our joint warfighters have come to crucially depend on, things like GPS, things like satellite communications, things like missile warning, that those things will be there even during a time of conflict. And we have to make sure of that because we need to be able, that's how you deter conflict. So if our adversary, especially China, feels like they can deny us these use of these critical space capabilities, like with anti-satellite weapons that they're now developing, whether co-orbital or from the ground, then that creates in the space environment what we call a first mover advantage, meaning whoever moves first can shoot down the other guy's satellites, to put it bluntly. And it's much easier to do that than to defend your own satellites. And so we don't want that. That is kind of destabilizing for space conflict. And so what we want to get to is a point where our capabilities are resilient enough that your adversary doesn't have an incentive to go do that first. And then that contributes to deterrence and stability in space. So to be very clear, any kind of war in space is a horrible thing for everybody. We'll have debris everywhere. At least part of the environment will be unusable for decades, if not longer. So deterring conflict is our number one mission, and the way that we get after that is by having these resilient capabilities so that they don't look like attractive targets for our adversary to take out. The thing that has changed too is that there are a lot more space weapons that can defeat space capabilities, jammers, anti-satellite missiles that our adversaries are fielding. And so that's why we're so concerned about this and want to make sure that even if they choose to use those, that they're not going to be effective at accomplishing their mission, and then therefore they will choose not to use them. So that's the whole deterrence thinking and why we want our space capabilities to be resilient in the time of conflict.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Super important. So presumably the Space Force doesn't do it all alone. There was a question in the back to Travis about collaboration and how civil space, commercial space, national security space, intel, even allies and partners work together. Can you talk a little bit about collaboration, and especially with the stand-up of a new service, and who you're partnering with and why?
Thank goodness we don't have to do it all alone, because there's so much activity going on in the space enterprise now. That's why it's such an exciting time to be here, and it's such an exciting place to work with all the commercial space innovation. Allies and partners are very interested in collaborating and partnering with us on space. All of that it lets us, magnify our capabilities by a factor of 10 or more, just because there's all this stuff going on outside of our little DoD world of what we're doing. And so I'm the director of architecture there in the Space Acquisition Office, and so my number one job is to make sure I build architectures that are conducive to integrating in partner capabilities. So those partner capabilities might come from commercial companies, it might come from allies and partners. Wherever these capabilities come from, we want to have an architecture that allows those to be integrated in and used. So, one of the big victories of NATO in Europe was to establish interoperability standards so that like our jet fighters work with the German jet fighters, et cetera. So same kind of thing in space. We're just at the earlier stages of making sure that we have the architectures that are conducive to partnership. Then that is an enabler to going out and building those partnerships. And like on the international front, I mean, there are just dozens and dozens of countries that are interested in partnering with us on space stuff, whether it be science and technology, space domain awareness, data exchanges, operations. It is an area that is ripe for international collaboration, and there's a need to bring down the barriers in that area so that we can do more of that.
Yeah, and working now, when I joined Airbus US 3.5 years ago at the start of COVID, really that message hit home. During COVID, people are working together in new ways, not knowing each other, and realizing how the connectivity across the globe is so important. And with various threats coming in, you realize, okay, you can have a disease that brings everything to a halt. So how do we collaborate better and get over some fears? Because a lot of times there's fears about partnering, whether it's internationally or with your competitor, and getting over those to really the practical side. So I'm curious, what's the mindset and the mentality and emotion behind collaboration? For some background, the program that I referred to earlier that Eric and I worked on, there was a lot of drama, and it was
excitement. Excitement.
Yeah, it was excitement. There was passionate enthusiasm and very strong opinions on each side of what to do, what was right, what was wrong, what was possible, what wasn't possible, what you could and couldn't do. And the barriers weren't necessarily technical. There were technical challenges for sure, but a lot of challenges were emotional and people and mindset and our beliefs. Where do you see the mindset of space today, with that willingness to collaborate on one side and having to do it all on our own, and what barriers you have to overcome to bring people together?
That's a really good question, and I do agree. The biggest barriers are cultural and not technical here. But my job is to take away the technical barriers. Then we'll work on the cultural
Okay.
stuff. However, on the cultural side, so past 6 months or so, we've been working on a Space Force commercial strategy. And the reason that the CSO and my boss, the Assistant Secretary, are working on that is to show, lay out a vision for the workforce of what these partnerships are going to look like in the future. And it's much different than what we have done in the past, where that traditionally we have controlled and owned our own stuff and operated our own stuff. And partly that was because there were no other options out there. Now that there are all those other options out there, we need to, I will say, we can't beat China without embracing all of the capabilities available to us. And by the way, when I say beat China, I mean deter conflict. That is what victory looks like in space. And so to get after the cultural thing, we're going to start with this strategy. And the idea here is there's a lot of little prototype projects and early wins to show how change is going to be effective in the organization. A lot of education of what the advantages of the new way are. For example, one of the pieces of resistance that we run into in embracing commercial is, aren't you worried about the cyber risk? There's so many vulnerabilities in the commercial systems. And I'm like, no, actually, reducing my cyber risk is one of the reasons I want to have a hybrid space architecture that includes commercial, because risk is two things. It's like the probability that something bad's going to occur, and then the consequences of something bad is going to occur. So think about it this way. If you have 10 ways of getting your mission done, and one of them gets hit by a cyber attack and goes down, no big deal. I got 9 other ways to get the mission done. I will fight through and get that one recovered as quickly as I can. If you got one way of getting the mission done, which might be your government way, you still have vulnerabilities. But if that way goes down, you're dead. So embracing these commercial partners really helps us reduce our cyber risks and enhance our resiliency, which are tied together there. So those are some of the ways we're working on getting after the cultural resistance, but change is hard but essential. And really the focus on deterring conflict with China is very helpful to driving these kind of changes into the organization.
Yep. So you mentioned talking to the workforce, so maybe shifting a little bit to workforce. I'm going to ask another audience question, and we will ask for your questions as well, so be thinking. How many of you had experience or having experience in college with hardware, flying a CubeSat or something that might be in space now? Okay, quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So this is a change of in school and college and sometimes even high school levels, with students having more hands-on experience sooner. I don't know, maybe I'll say small sats weren't invented when I was in school, but there were different things like Getaway Special for the space shuttle back then, and I wish that there was maybe a little bit more hardware. So what are you seeing with some of the newer Guardians and Air Force professionals? Are you seeing changes with the skill sets that people are coming out with of college and how they're contributing into these ideas?
I definitely see changes in increases in the number of people that have the skills needed to excel in this business, and that's because now there's so many more opportunities. All these space startups, all these commercial ventures going on, and so just the market is encouraging more people to go into these fields, which is great. There's more opportunities to learn things in these fields, which is great. And it's exciting, which is great. So, so I think all of those, I see all of that. But the number one thing I see is, which is even better than the technical skills, is just a willingness to kind of rethink things and embrace new ways of doing things, and not taking the old way as the only way of doing things. And I think that's really healthy for us too in the space business. And that kind of spirit is exactly what we need to make sure we're pursuing the right things and not letting those opportunities slip us by. So I love that. And that's kind of what Space Force is all about. When we first stood up the Space Force, General Raymond brought us into an auditorium, some leaders into an auditorium there, and he said, guess what? we got what we said we wanted. We didn't think we were going to get it this fast, but we did. And so you now have a blank sheet of paper. You guys go off, and all those things you've been complaining that the Air Force didn't do right for 20 years, you fix those things. You have to go fix that stuff. And it was really empowering, actually, to have that kind of a message delivered. And that's so the Space Force is all about embracing that kind of new way of thinking and not being bound by the past. And that, I think, has been super inspirational and that more valuable than the technical things.
So that's like your own startup, which makes me ask another question. On a scale of 1 to 10 of being an entrepreneur spirit is a 10, and being, say, super conservative, traditional is a 1. Where are you?
I'm going to say this one goes to 11.
Oh.
But I want to know if anybody under 40 in the room knows what that is a quote from. Yes? What is it? Spinal Tap. All right, you come up here. I got a prize for you. You didn't know the name. You did. Come here.
Come on up. He has a prize for you.
Yeah. All right, here's your prize. This is my coin as your reward. You are crossing, multicultural barriers on your entertainment experience, and we encourage that. So that's from Spinal Tap. It's a funny quote, and really, what I mean by the 11 is that hey, within the Pentagon, I'm probably one of the most forward-leaning people that I've found. Yeah. Now, with the wider space community, entrepreneurs and stuff, there are people that are much more towards 11 than I am in that community, but I'm trying to do the right thing in the Pentagon and in the Space Acquisition Office to lean as far forward as we can and embrace these new ways of thinking.
I love it. I love it. So maybe on that note, any questions from the audience? There's a question back here.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm currently a wargaming intern in support of joint warfighting exercises at the National Defense University. I was wondering, as we've stepped into this era of great power competition, we've done a great job of assuring ISR, increasing our space situational awareness. On the sort of procurement and acquisition side, what sort of challenges have we faced with working with commercial side and the defense industrial base? What are some of the biggest gaps that you've identified?
I think I'm going to point to one of the biggest gaps is still it comes down to communication or failure to understand each other, and then people within the government failing to understand all the tools that they actually have been empowered to use. I keep running into that where, those of us in the Pentagon, we're like, man, Congress really wants us to do this. Look at all these authorities that they gave us. And yet you go talk to people in the field, they're like, well, I didn't know I could do that, or my leadership won't let me do that. And they still feel like they're down in this little box in terms of the tools that are available to them. So I think part of that is an education and an exchange of information and a showing by example what kind of things we can do. So I would point to the Space Development Agency as one of our most innovative, rapid-moving parts of the Space Force, and anybody in the Space Force can do that. They don't have any special tools. They don't have very many special authorities granted by Congress, and so I think that kind of education and exchange of information is the biggest barrier to it happening. There really are not any laws or policies that are standing in the way of us moving a lot faster that we can't work with. I'm not saying things can't be improved, but I think the low-hanging fruit is to use the tools we've been given.
Another question over here? She's coming around.
How is the Defense Logistics Agency involved in your considerations for space architecture and resilience in regards to rare earth minerals, considering that they're needed for manufacturing of space assets?
So rare earth metal supply chain resilience?
Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
so really, the resilience has, when I was talking about resilience, I was talking about, the capability that we're presenting to the joint forces, but that starts way earlier. And supply chain resilience is the term we use to refer to the fact that you need to be able to produce these things when they're needed, without barriers. And what that means is careful analysis and ensuring that we're not solely dependent on a source that could deny those capabilities. So that all factors into the overall category of supply chain resilience, which is super important. And there's lots of people looking at that. I don't have I think there isn't really a need for any, great strategy there, except to do the needed engineering work and due diligence to make sure that you're not getting yourselves backed into a corner with only one source for some of those critical things. It's a big deal. No, there is no doubt about that.
Question over here. Did I see one? Another question over here, please.
Wow, shocker. Hey, my name's Frank Spellman. I'm an analyst with Bryce Tech. It's very rare that in anybody's lifetime we would see a standing up of a new branch of our military. So this is kind of like a how's it going question. In particular, the relationship between Space Force, the Air Force, and U.S. Space Command, what that's like and what it might look like in the future.
How's it going? Really great. I mean, considering how young we are and how many challenges we've had along the way and the kind of growing pains and stuff, we have delivered a tremendous amount of capabilities. We've embraced a lot of change and have architectures that are much more resilient than they were even 2 years ago. So in terms of delivering on the mission, it's been great. In terms of the excitement and motivation of the people, we're a little tired sometimes, but we're doing fine. It's still a place where we feel like we can have an impact and work is rewarding on most days. So I would say it's going very well from those regards. We still have a long ways to go. And that's the whole idea, is that you have people waking up every morning excited about space, thinking about, okay, what can I do to do better in my mission that I hear about space? And I don't have any other domains I have to worry about, any other things I need to think about. Let's just make this part better. And I think that focus has been even more effective than what we envisioned back in 2019 when the Space Force first stood up. So I would say A+ in terms of what we've been able to do in such a short period of time.
So maybe as we wrap it up, I will ask you to share what's the best piece of advice you've ever received, and what is a piece of advice you wish you had received?
Ooh, that second one is a good one. I think the best piece of advice I've ever received, this was actually early in my career when I was testing F-16s. I loved it. It was fantastic. One day I got called into my boss, and I was planning to do that for another 3 years. I got called into my boss's office, and he said, "Hey, Felt, you're doing great, but I need you to go over here and do this other testing job and test the airborne laser." And I was like, "What? I have a plan. I love this job. I don't want to do anything different." But he said, "Trust me, this will be good for you, and it's what we really need you to do." And so I did. Okay, fine, I'll go do that. And really, that did turn out to be a great opportunity. And so I like the quote from Eisenhower about how plans are worthless, but planning is invaluable. And so I think that was the best advice I got is, it's good to have a plan for your career, but the number one thing, you need to don't pass up opportunities that you didn't think about or didn't even know were there, because those curveballs are some of the best things that are likely to happen in your career. And they've certainly happened to me many times since then. And then I'm kind of like, okay, well, I don't know, but I'm up for anything. Let's go do it. And most of those have turned out to be really good. So that's, I think I'm going to answer that's my answer to both of those questions. I wish I'd known that sooner.
Yeah.
But it's also the most important thing I think I've learned is just to keep an agile mindset that's open to opportunities that you might not know about today, and maybe you can't know about today. But those are some of the best things that are ahead of you.
Well, thank you for sharing your advice, your career journey, what the Space Force is doing today, and the difference that it's making. Really appreciate your service. I'm glad you did not retire a couple years ago. You're still here to be that entrepreneurship that is so much needed. So join me in thanking Colonel Eric.
Thank you, Deborah. It's a pleasure, as always. And thank you all for being here today. I think this is really exciting development opportunity, and I'm really pleased to have had the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. And if we do need to have the fire, let's step outside. Like we're going to do pretty soon.
That'll
It'll be plenty hot.
reception
At the
afterward.
reception.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Colonel Felt. Thank you, Deborah. What a wonderful conversation. Appreciate you both being here. Next.